one. So
Oh, okay. I'll just get us started then. All right. So, I guess the as opposed to some of the other kind of CDS sessions, there aren't really lot of like huge projects here. The big one is probably the performance CI work, but we can talk about that a little bit more later. What I kind of wanted to focus on starting out is there are a lot of smaller efforts that are kind of scattered around the code base, though kind of the primary focus here is more on the BlueStore and OSD side. But there's a lot of stuff here that, and some of which I haven't captured, that I think we should really focus on trying to get into Pacific and having be kind of shore up a couple of areas that aren't so great right now. So starting on the BlueStore side, we've got kind of a couple of specific areas that folks have been working on. One of the big ones, actually, and has been kind of a big project, but mostly took place during the Octopus timeframe, is Adam's Calm family sharding work. And that, I think, has taken a little bit longer than we were hoping initially. So I don't believe that has merged yet. I think there were some errors even fairly recently. But that's actively being worked on. And I imagine we may actually backport that to Octopus, but for Pacific, I imagine there's going to be a lot of testing with that and a lot of, maybe some fine tuning of that. The big advantage there is that it's going to give us much better write amplification and potentially better space amplification in RocksDB. So that's pretty exciting. When that PR merges, I've got a couple of PRs that are waiting for that to finish, or for that to get in. The first one is this Onode double cache fix. And that's been waiting for a while, for probably about half a year now, maybe even more than half a year. That will let us avoid some of the complication we've had in the past and still do currently with when onodes in BlueStore end up being read from disk rather than just from cache. We end up populating RocksDB's block cache with the same data, and that is, ends up kind of polluting both caches and is slow, and we end up with significantly less cache overall. So that can happen after Adam's Calm family sharding fix. After that, we can go back and I think try to get the cache age-based binning in. So that's been hanging around for a while too, but the gist of that is that it lets us look at different caches and kind of the relative age of things in those caches, and then make decisions about how much memory each cache should get based on kind of the age of the things that are in each one. So rather than having like one giant LRU for everything, this kind of lets us have separate LRUs, but still have some of that kind of global LRUE-like behavior for everything. So I want to get that in for Pacific as well. I think we need the other fix first before we can do that. So those are kind of the things that I was primarily working on myself in BlueStore. Igor has a bunch of stuff that he has been working on as well. One of those is Onode data structure diet. So basically shrinking the size of the data structures for Onodes. I think that was like a 10 or 20% improvement, which is a big win. This is stuff that we really kind of need in general because we have a lot of people wanting to be able to use less memory or get better performance on a specific memory footprint. So that's going to be really important. And then also Igor's work on hybrid allocator and deferring big writes. Those, when combined, let us reduce or shrink the min alloc size on hard drives to 4K. and that's a huge space improvement, the space amplification improvement versus what we currently have. And in some cases, it was actually faster, which is really nice too. It is slower in the sequential read after fragmentation case, and we'll probably need to watch that a little bit, but it's overall a big win. So, Igor, do you have anything you want to add for the stuff that you are working on right now? I think all of the stuff you're doing is really important.
I think you presented my stuff pretty well. So, nothing interesting to report additionally.
Okay. So all of that stuff together, I think, is going to be a huge improvement for BlueStore. I think that's going to really kind of shore up most of the things that we can easily shore up without going into things like rewriting the pglog code or changing other kind of more dramatic aspects of how BlueStore works. And most of that's probably not really a great use of our time given all the work going into Crimson and CStore. So I think this is probably a good target for kind of performance improvements in BlueStore for targeting Pacific. The only other thing that really on here that we could do specific to BlueStore would be testing the IOU ring code that already actually has merged, and consider making that the default for kernels that support it. There's some cleanup in there that we could do. Right now, the IOU ring code is reusing the AIoT structures in BlueStore. It probably more or less is fine the way it is. It's just kind of a little, maybe a little bit messy, but there is that. If anyone is interested in that work or testing it or looking at it, that would be something that would be worthwhile probably to do potentially for Pacific. I don't know if we have Roman on the call. No, it doesn't look like it. Igor, do you think, is that something that Roman might be interested in looking at doing? Because I know he was really heavily involved in that stuff for a while.
Yeah, I think he would like to look at this, help with this.
Cool. I can try to help out on the testing side if if that's would be helpful. But if he's interested in continuing to work on it and kind of maybe make the IOU ring code a little bit more of like a first class citizen, that could be a good use of time, I think. Assuming that it looks like it's working well.
Yeah, we'll ping him and
cool.
Ask.
Okay. So pglog, pgscaling, pgbalancer changes from Octopus. This is stuff that Sage was working on, and we did already kind of improve it or work on some things to make it a little bit better. I think that will need to be ongoing, and just make sure that we're not introducing bad behavior in any situations that were previously we were not doing bad things. Josh, I see you added a couple of things on there. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure.
I think Josh, maybe that was you.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay.
Yes, we have a few things already planned for the PG balancer improvements there. One is simply turning it on by default and in up-app mode, and up-app mode requires Luminous clients, also setting the minimum compat client setting to require Luminous clients for the cluster for new clusters. This is basically what we're targeting for compatibility for Octopus anyway, so it's not really an issue. In terms of other improvements there, also some additional things that the balancer doesn't consider today that it could to provide better performance or better space utilization. One is the up map mode doesn't yet balance based on actual bytes used. it works based on a number of PGs. So if you have unevenly used PGs, then you'll get things get imbalanced. And it also doesn't consider the space used by OMAP. Another
Josh,
possible improvement. Or go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to ask you, in practice, do we typically see a lot of variation in the space used in OMAP or in objects that differs highly from the distribution of PGs? Like, do we see a lot of variability there beyond the PG distribution variability?
Occasionally we do for OMAP, within the same pool, usually not, assuming that the sharding settings are appropriate, but there can be situations where the sharding settings maybe aren't quite appropriate, and so you do get some objects that are much larger than others.
Okay.
But I guess this mainly matters more when you're looking at cross pools. So you may have some pools that have a lot of larger objects and others that have not so many large objects, even though they have comparable numbers of PGs.
I can see that being really tricky, because what if you have, like, on one OSD you've got some giant object, right? Like someone put something there, and another OSD you've got like tons of tiny little like objects, right? Do you really want to balance in a way that like shoves all of the tiny objects on one and the big object on the other?
Yeah, I think you can't come up with like a global solution that is going to work in every case. It's kind of, there's too many dimensions to optimize for what you're trying to do, but you want to have to sane defaults that work in the majority of cases at least.
You could imagine someday you'd want to almost look at like heuristics on what's the distribution of object sizes on OSDs, and then like say, we're just going to eat this big object over here or something because we don't want to screw up the overall distribution or something.
Yeah, another consideration would be for performance. So you might consider like further in the future trying to actually analyze like what kind of performance you're getting across different OSDs and trying to move some load from one space to another space, which might be even orthogonal to space usage entirely.
Yeah.
But that seems like a more kind of risky proposition. So in the shorter term,
I think we need to make that work in the MDS better first before we try OSDs.
That's a good test bed. You're only at least moving it in memory state there. But another thing that's come up that would help with that is trying to balance baseline primariness, since you're always reading from the primary. So you can at least balance the distribution of read workload.
Yeah. I occasionally see read from like, the more local OSD come up periodically. Is that still something that people are trying to do, or?
Yeah, actually Sam made that work correctly and got it fully tested over the course of Octopus. So for Pacific, we could try to actually make use of that more. I think it's been coming up as more interesting to folks in some kind of environments where you have a cluster across two different, say, availability zones or data centers, where you want to, prevent that yourself from going across that long network link as much as possible.
Sure. I wonder if you could somehow rig that up in a hyperconverged environment where if you happen to have a copy on an OSD that's in a container local to the same node you're on, you could do the read from it. That'd be tricky, though, I think.
It should. Well, RBD, we added that late in Octopus to librd to do that. So in theory, you could just use the crush location, inject that into the thing, and it should pick the closest one to the crush location. Who knows if it works, but you could try it.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that to be a huge benefit, since you would only get a very small percentage of your objects for the same host. But it could have some effect, especially if you have like things in copies across racks, and you can at least maybe read from the local rack.
Yeah, and for small
Yeah.
clusters, yeah, for the hyperconverged cases are usually pretty small, right? They're not like
Yeah,
massive 10,000 node. Oh,
Cool. That's neat. I'm glad that's working. Just trying to think if there's anything else interesting you could do with it. I mean, like kind of what you were saying, Josh, in terms of distributing load. If a particular OSC is like super backed up, maybe it could just be like go read from something else, right?
yeah, potentially.
Like if a primary is just like, I'm not going to respond for a while, like don't bother.
Yeah.
Cool. But anything else on the PG scaling, PG balancer? Did we ever get the change in where we're going to shrink the number of, increase the number of PGs and shrink the PG log length?
But yeah, I think we did make it depend on the PG log length depend on the number of PGs, so it's like dynamically set now. Is that right?
That already merged for Octopus.
Okay, cool. So did we end up changing the number of the target number of PGs then per like OSD?
I think in that testing we didn't find it was necessary to increase it. Just getting the autoscaler to, if we can change the autoscaler to make it not decrease things, I think that'll be sufficient.
Okay.
I think that's what we discussed in the past, right? With I think it was maybe your idea, Mark, with the autoscaler. Where currently it tries to increase things slowly over time, but if we could instead start out high and then prevent it from lowering unless it needs that extra room to grow for a certain point.
Yeah. So I think we're still going to target like 100 PGs per OSD roughly, right?
Yeah.
But then like the global limit we'd let be higher if we had like more pools or something. Was that
right? I think that was roughly the idea. And as long as we started out the pools in a better place and didn't shrink them, then we get the good performance out of the gate and the good long-term behavior too.
Does that all work? Are we confident that that's what we're doing?
Well, we're not doing that today, but that's what we want to do for Pacific and probably back to Octopus.
Sure. So we should target that for Pacific as well then?
Yeah. I think there's cards for this on the Rados Trello.
Oh, good. Okay. Very good. Cool. All right. Anything more on that?
I think those are the main things that we've been talking about for Pacific.
Okay. Cool. Then I will move on here to RGW CLS. So I think Casey is here. Eric's not here though. So this is something that we were looking at for Octopus, but it's just a little hairy, so it didn't make it in. But we did do a whole bunch of other stuff. And Eric has been working on kind of a lot of stuff surrounding this. This particular optimization is looking at avoiding re-encoding directory entries in the CLS code for RGW in the OSD, on the OSD side. Right now, we basically will decode that directory entry and then we'll use that, the data that we get from that, to make filtering decisions about what to send back to RGW. We might pre-filter right there in the OSD. That's really nice because it lets us avoid sending a bunch of stuff to RGW that it doesn't want. But the downside of it is that it means that we're doing all this work inside the OSD, decoding this thing, doing the filtering, and then potentially re-encoding and sending it off. So the goal here would be to send the encoded data directly to RGW, but still let potentially decode some smaller portion of data that lets you make your filtering decisions. That was kind of Casey's idea. There's a PR here that already at least used to work that kind of partially did some of this, but it wasn't. It didn't go nearly as far as what Casey does. I think it's still doing the decode. The PR that I wrote is doing the decode still, so you can make the filtering decisions. But then instead of re-encoding, it's just sending the original on. I think is, if I remember right, that's what it does. But anyway, that's the overall gist of this. Casey, what do you think? Is this something worth thinking about for Pacific?
I do remember that you shared some numbers on that, and it was like really, really expensive on the CPU there. So I think this could be a big help.
Yeah, and those numbers were all taken before Eric's work to reduce the refetching of data when doing bucket index listing. So it might have a much lesser effect now that we're not doing all of that. I don't know if it'll be linear or not, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I still think it's motivated.
Sure.
Finding a good way to design this that doesn't like obscure the CLS client interface, I think is the tricky part.
Yeah. Yeah, so my PR changes it, right? We'd need to have the client behave somewhat differently in this case. I don't know, I don't think there's any way to do it without changing the client, is there?
But potentially, I mean, we have the app structs that the client knows about. We could have a different version of those on the server side that leaves some of the pieces as buffer lists instead. But yeah, once you do that, you risk breaking things if you change one and not the other, for example.
Okay. Well, it sounds like maybe it's at least worth looking at. Maybe seeing if it's, still yielding reasonable performance improvement, and if it's something that we should, attempt. Do you think, is it something that Eric would be interested in doing since he's already been doing so much with the filtering, or should I continue looking at it?
I know Eric is pretty busy, so I don't know if he'll have time in the near term, but possibly later
Okay.
in Pacific. But let's keep it on the agenda for your performance calls.
Okay, that sounds good. Maybe we can kick this down later in the Pacific cycle, and if it's something that Eric has time to help out on or take over or whatever, definitely he can, because he's much more in tune with this code than I am. Otherwise, if I've got cycles, I could try to take a look at it as well. All right. The other thing for RGW I've got here, and I imagine this is probably not happening for Pacific, but I remember you had your proposal for avoiding write pauses during bucket index splitting, and it sounds like it got more complicated, if I remember right. Is that, am I remembering properly? Is it a scary job, or is it still reasonable?
It is a decent amount of work, but I think that I had a design that's workable there.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, we're doing some changes to Reshard for multi-site support That's going to be the first priority. But I don't think it changes too much about the ability to do the non-pausing version of it.
Okay. And I remember Yehuda had kind of a proposal or something as well for that. Is that did we ever review that? Was that something also that would be interesting to look at, or I don't really remember how it worked, to be honest.
Yeah, he did have some feedback and had an idea there.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know that part was necessary.
Okay. So given that what you guys are already doing, is this post-Pacific, you think?
Probably, unless somebody else wants to step up and work on it.
Right. Any takers? Anyone want to work on avoiding bucket index, write pauses during bucket index splitting? All right. We'll leave it as post-Pacific then, I think. All right, moving on. CephFS. Ephemeral pinning, I believe that did not make it in yet, right, Greg? For the first Octopus release?
Correct. It's not in, unfortunately.
Okay. I imagine probably targeted for Pacific into backport?
Yeah, it's supposedly ready for review, so I'm gonna try and look at it soon and get it in, and then mark it for backport once it's gone through testing for a little while.
Sure. At some point when that's ready, I can also take a look at that. Since I've got an actual test case that's really probably a good test for it with IO 500 compared to just doing round robin pinning.
Yeah, I'll ping you once it's in for sure.
Cool. So, okay, continue testing of that, see how that's going. I have been looking at the MDS and kind of the dynamic subtree partitioning scheme and kind of what our behavior is like when we can't use ephemeral pinning. So when you've got like a giant directory full of files and the MDS is trying to export stuff to other MDSs, and you've got this big kind of dance going on between the MDSs trying to export and import stuff. I've got a couple of ideas that I want to try. One thing I've noticed is that a lot of times when you have the authoritative MDS participating in trying to service requests, that particular MDS ends up significantly slower than the other ones. So one really dumb change might be to just not have the authoritative MDS participating in servicing requests. Have at least if you've got like a lot of MDSs, if you only got like 2, well, then maybe you still want it to. But if you've got like 16 or 32 or whatever, you may want to have that one just not do anything. So that might be something to look at. Certainly in the round robin case with directories, I see it. So there's a couple of other things I'm going to try playing with there. So it's all very experimental. No definite plans for anything yet there, but there might be some things that we can do that might help a little. So yes, I do plan on at least attempting some of that for Pacific. And then CephFS kernel client and RBD kernel client. Ilya and I have been working on trying to diagnose an issue that cropped up under kind of strange conditions where when we have 25 gigabit links, multiple 25 gigabit links, we see this bottleneck where with enough I/O depth, we can't kind of get past about 3 gigabytes per second for sequential reads on a single client. Whereas with librd or seemingly libsefs, we can do significantly better, more like 8. So I would like to figure out what's going on with this and hopefully get a fix in for Pacific. It's probably not noticeable for a lot of people that have 40 gigabit or slower per client, but as faster networking cards become available, as people are using 100 gigabit now, I think we're going to start seeing this crop up as a complaint. So if we can take care of it for the next release, I think it would be a really good idea. Unfortunately, we still don't really understand why it's happening. And I have not yet, Ilya, been able to get Lockstat set up to do a test that way. But that's still probably the next step, I think. All right. So I think that covers basically all of the kind of incremental project-y type stuff, smaller projects that are kind of, I would like to personally target for Pacific. Are there any others that people have that should be on this list that I don't have here? All right. Well, then the other kind of big thing here that Josh wanted to make sure that we had on this list is performance CI. So this has been a long-standing request that we be able to tag PRs and run performance suites against them to make sure that we're not introducing regressions. And for me personally, it would be really nice too, because then I don't hopefully have to do as many performance bisects anymore. So let's see, Josh, did you want to talk at all about this, or?
Yeah. I thought we could maybe think about what like the minimum first steps would be, and then also talk a little bit about what we could do in the longer term. So
sure.
Some of the existing pieces I think are pretty much already in place in terms of CBT support for running in Jenkins. Kifu and Radek did a significant amount of work to get that working for Crimson, and you can essentially just make a comment on that tells Jenkins to go and run a performance job and reports back some results now. Amnon has also been adding some support for more metrics there, so we can see the cycles per app rather than just the pure throughput or pure IOPS. So you can actually tell how efficient we're being, and if we're just only increasing performance by using more CPU, that's maybe not the best use of resources. But so with those existing pieces and the additional machines we have now in Jenkins, I think all the inserter are being added there, right?
David just added those 3, so we've got 4 machines for Jenkins now, and we should be able to start adding more as over the coming weeks or months.
So it seems like we're in a pretty good place where we could add another command for running maybe a minimal benchmark against classical OSD as well.
Yep, I think so. And Kifu mentioned it's just like a one-line change adding that flag. So theoretically, it might be pretty easy.
Great. I think that'd be a great start. Even just having a simple Grados bench run tell us if we have some huge regression that causes performance to drop by like 50%, that would be a big win.
Yeah, I agree. So I suppose a couple of things. Radek, the stuff that you added for looking at the cycles, the perf cycles reporting, is that something that's integrated into the Jenkins like test coverage piece, or is it just performance that we look at right now?
Well, cycle plus are added to CBT. all the requirements it has toward a node is actually to have the perf tools installed. So even, well, I don't think that the nodes have the package already, but it's just a matter of package installation. Shouldn't be a big deal.
Oh, but I mean, for pass fail, if it has like worse cycles per op, is that something that, are we looking at that already, or is it just based on performance if the test
No,
passes or fails?
We are just for cycles per op. Okay, I don't think we look this at the moment. Yep, we need to install we would need to install the perf tools on the nodes to have it operational. But it's even more preferred to merge the CBT PRs by Avnum that extends the support, the coverage of cycles per op just from the Rados bench integration to all plugins, especially to RBD. That will be the thing. That is the thing we'll be interested in.
Right now, with the cycles prop, is that just for OSDs, or can you do that in the for RGW or this MDS or other things as well?
It's by default is for OSD, but it shouldn't be a huge deal to extend for other daemons.
Okay. So Josh, is that kind of what you were thinking in terms of like test coverage, being able to go back and look at, make sure that you're not increasing the amount of CPU you're using for, with the particular commit, even if you get the same performance?
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be a good first step. Just even running the same like RBD benchmark as Crimson, and just being able to tell whether a given PR is getting the same kind of throughput we saw previously or same kind of CPU efficiency we saw before.
Are those two metrics enough? The absolute performance and then the efficiency of the performance, kind of those two together, does it kind of give
I think
us
a good starting point. I think longer term we want to consider probably more things than that, like probably latency percentiles, and probably want to look at maybe things more graphically as well.
Sure. It might get messy, kind of trying to, like when you start looking at the latency, like 99% latency or something. You can get these outliers sometimes that really skew things in weird ways. So you need to do really long running tests to get good data, and then it's hard.
Yeah. That's where it gets kind of more complicated. I mean, I think we probably want to keep the Jenkins jobs relatively simple, and maybe rely on less frequent Toothology runs. Like it has DBT integration to Toothology, so we can have longer running tests there, and that maybe have expanded coverage to different more configurations or more workloads.
Yeah. Well, let's start out with the easy case of just identifying regressions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Tell we've broken something horribly, then at least that's a good start.
For sure.
Oh, results graphing. So let's see. Sridhar, were you working on that?
Yeah. So what I've done so far is pretty basic right now, but Mark, whatever you're talking about, especially with respect to exporting data into SQLite and other specific tools, that's something that will be more valuable according to you, right?
So Yeah, the kind of a very long-standing goal has been to figure out how we could take like a results directory that's got all of the runs in it from CBT and be able to import those into like an index. I like to call it an index rather than a database because I see it as being more kind of just a way of kind of indexing the authoritative information, which is actually still the directory structure. But potentially you could have CBT just writing every day or every so often data into this thing and have metadata associated with the run, and then use SQLite to be able to do queries against it in a much faster way. And from there, take those queries, the results from those queries, and then send them off to Grafana or some other database somewhere that's got some kind of GUI built on top of it for visualization, or some other thing that uses your tools to visualize as well.
Yeah, that was something that I can start looking at as well. Yeah.
Would you be interested in it? Like, would it be a fun
Yeah,
project?
sure.
Okay,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
cool. Well then, great. I will put you down for that. That's really good. We've needed it for a long time, so that's exciting. All right, Josh. In the other CDS session for Teuthology, the topic of labels, or actually, sorry, not Teuthology, for continuous integration with functional testing, the topic of labels came up. And I don't know if we want to do the exact same thing or not here. I had just kind of assumed we would grab like the performance label, anything that's got the performance label, and then kind of mix and match other labels and say, okay, if it's performance in RGW, then we run this test suite. If it's performance in this other thing, we run this other one. Did the other one go farther beyond that? Do we need more than that?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure if the other one. I think that was about as far as the other one got. I guess I'm not clear exactly on the current Jenkins integration, and I think we would need something additional to be able to look at labels there and parameterize things. But I'm guessing it wouldn't be too difficult.
Okay. Radek, do you know? I don't remember if it was you or Kifu that worked on Jenkins CBT integration work. Does it seem reasonable to be able to read labels like that?
Sorry, could you repeat, please?
For Jenkins with CBT, would it be difficult to be able to read labels like performance and RGW or RBD or Crimson, and then be able to run different CBT benchmarks based on those labels?
I see. I don't know, to be honest. I don't have a response here. We'll need to check.
Okay.
I guess it doesn't matter, right? I mean, today the way the perf test works is it's a trigger phrase. Even if we could have something like a trigger phrase for, like, just say, a trigger RGW performance test. So we could have a trigger phrase and it could do the same thing. So I think the hooks are already there. I'm not very sure we really need the label to be actually consumed versus a phrase.
Would that mean that you'd have to type the phrase in, or would based on
it's pretty much what we do for for the Crimson performance test. We do have a trigger phrase, just like even for make check we have a trigger phrase. So I'm pretty sure that Jenkins is able to consume trigger phrases. So if that's the easier way forward, I don't see a problem there. But yeah, in no way I'm saying that we shouldn't explore the other option too. The other one will be probably easier, but could cause some confusion in general. Like sometimes if you do add a tag by mistake and then you remove it, how does it behave then?
I see. Well, I suppose that any build should be able to run any of the tests, right? So if you mislabeled it and had performance and RGW for a change that was done to RBD, you would just end up with RGW test results for it that would be meaningless, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would like to look into the labels if we can. It just seems like it would be a lot of extra work on somebody's part to go in and regularly tell, in the PR comment to tell it to start running performance tests. I mean, it's doable, right? It's not hard. It's just, then someone has to remember to do that regularly.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the first step would just be using the trigger phrase, and then the next step would just be like making sure that the labels can do the job for us.
Sure. Okay. That seems reasonable. All right. Regarding benchmarks, right now we can very easily run Rados Bench, FIO, and HS Bench. That kind of covers RBD, RGW, and kind of core object and sort of OMAP. Not great, but at least gives us some coverage of it. For CephFS, we can do FIO, but for the MDS, we probably want something like MDTest. Or if anyone knows of other benchmarks that would be better, we could include that as well. We don't have IOR and MDTest in CBT yet, but it would be, I think, fairly straightforward to add them as another benchmark class, and using the client endpoints that we have now there. Does that sound reasonable to folks? Are there other benchmarks that people would like to see?
That sounds pretty reasonable to me. I guess one thing I was wondering about was is there already like a generic format for the results in CPT? So we can track the same kind of metrics across different benchmarks.
Yeah, there is not. CBT just dumps the results from whatever benchmark you ran into the results directory. There is a common format for the metadata associated with the test. So you can go into that directory and always kind of look through the YAML representation of the DIC that was the combination of parameters that created that test.
Sure.
But the actual results are in whatever format the benchmark dumped them in.
Okay. Well, I guess maybe one approach would be to follow what Sweetheart did with his PR, interpreting the FIO results and maybe implement something similar for other benchmarks. Each benchmark could understand its own results.
Yep, that seems like a reasonable idea.
Do you think that would make sense, Sweetheart?
Yeah, I mean, right now what I have attempted is like a simple case where you get the results from FIO in JSON format, and what the tool does right now is just get the necessary information and dump it into either a graphical format or put it into a CSV format that one can use to realize the results using any other tool, for example. So depending on how we want the data to be structured, we can probably dump it the way we want and basically either visualize it or use it in some other form. Yeah.
Cool. Maybe related to that topic, Josh, when you and I were talking earlier, the reason why I would like to kind of look at indexing the resulting data rather than just dumping into a database is because I suspect as we try to go through this process of figuring out how to kind of format the results from all these different benchmarks, we're probably going to change the schema of that index really regularly. And so being able to recreate it on demand and really easily change it anytime we want, and have it independent from this kind of graphing database or whatever we end up putting it in someday, I think would be really useful or really helpful for us if those things are decoupled from each other.
Yeah, I agree. And similarly for like the tool that Sweetheart has written, it's already decoupled, so we can run that independently and go back and if we change things later, regenerate the same index or it's the same comment format for old data.
Yep. My hope is that we'd be able to take a CBT results directory and have like a tool that could basically, maybe the CBT command itself, it doesn't matter, that goes and calls the result formatter for each benchmark based on whatever result directory it's currently working on, and then can build up that index without on demand. Essentially, you could just delete the index, run the command, it rebuilds it with whatever new schema changes you made or whatever. And then you can take this thing that you've got, this results index, perform queries against it, ship off those results then to your thing that's more static, that doesn't change or rarely changes.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, actually. I guess one other aspect.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to kind of change to a different aspect of this, but if you want to continue talking about this, go ahead, go for it.
I was just going to ask, Sridhar, does that make sense? Does that seem like a reasonable thing to do from your perspective?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Based on what you talked about, yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, cool. Okay, Josh, was there something else that you were gonna?
Yeah, I was going to bring up the idea in the longer term running kind of larger scale or at least longer running tests via Teuthology at a maybe a decreased pace, perhaps once a week or something like that.
Sure.
I guess one of the things we want to investigate there is would we need to use like the same dedicated set of machines each time, or is variability low enough that it would be sufficient to use the entire pool?
I think if it's on a separate network, if we have it on like the performance network that we theoretically are hopefully going to have, we'll see, then it might be more okay to do that. I remember at least back when we were trying to do this years ago with Teuthology, we actually saw network variability, like fairly significant network variability, depending on the rest of the load of all the client machines on the Teuthology network. And we didn't build it for speed, right? I mean, the switches, I don't know if we still are using the same switches we had back then or not, but we did not have like a lot of uplink bandwidth between switches, if I remember right. So depending on what your cross-section of nodes and whether or not they were on the same switch looked like, you could see, some slowdown sometimes.
Right.
I think maybe, so that's one thing. The hardware is one thing. We probably would just need to be real careful about how we did it, but that's a solvable problem. Probably the thing that I would be most concerned about is that project that you said. I think we've got an intern that's going to work on to change the scheduling behavior of Teuthology so that it can support dynamic priorities or growing priorities.
Yeah, and it's I guess more about making the scheduler able to integrate more with the locking system. So you, instead of having a whole bunch of workers competing for locks, you just have one dispatcher that takes a job out of the queue, the next one with the highest priority, locks the nodes for it, and then runs it. So you can't get into a situation where one job that needs a ton of nodes sits around waiting forever, since it just gets started by a bunch of jobs with only needing 2 nodes, for example.
Sure. So essentially, if you did it that way, you wouldn't have to actually have accumulating priority. You just would be a little less efficient in terms of like having nodes sitting around waiting.
Yeah, exactly. We could
Okay.
incorporate that accumulating priority piece too. I think that's maybe more of a stretch goal for this project.
Sure. Okay, so assuming that that was there, that would make it much more feasible to do something like this.
But before that, we could even start with longer running tests that don't need that larger scale.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questions would be, does it, if we've already got Jenkins set up on these nodes, is there any reason to not just use that infrastructure to be able to grab, the four nodes that are there right now and do it that way, rather than like blowing Jenkins off of them, having Teuthology take them for a while to do stuff, and then try to give them back to Jenkins?
I guess we have to just make sure that Jenkins isn't trying to use them at the same time, right? So we need some kind of we need it to be aware of when Teuthology is using them. We do it that way.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, is that simpler than just having Jenkins do everything? Since CBT kind of sort of overlaps with Teuthology, I mean, it's not entirely the same, but it it does some of the same things, and Jenkins does some of the same things. So we've kind of got like this like Venn diagram, right, of overlapping capabilities.
Right.
But Teuthology might buy us some things that we don't get with just CBT and Jenkins, right? I mean, it can reimage the node, so you can always be on a fresh node if you want, or you could change kernels or do other things that you couldn't easily do with just Jenkins.
It's also a lot easier to construct like a matrix of different configurations that you want to run with your Teuthology suite. So that's one of the reasons I think it makes more sense for kind of the larger coverage of tests. For example, you could have like a long-running test that does different kinds of each different kind of benchmark. You have one that tests with Bluestar, one that tests with Crimson. All kind of a simple YAML structure.
Sure. Yeah, CBT gives you some of that, and that you can do things like run like a series of tests, right? You could run, FIO and Rados Bench on the same cluster if you wanted to. I think, Nihat, right now with Crimson, does it rebuild a cluster for every single test?
I think so.
So yeah, I think if I remember right, in the way that the Teuthology setup works, every single permutation of a test rebuilds a cluster. And you can do that in CBT, but you don't have to. You could run a bunch of different benchmarks against one cluster.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing in both cases. Right? You could construct the same kind of CBT config in Teuthology if you wanted to run more than one thing at the same time, or you could do it like we have it today.
Sure.
New cluster.
Sure. Would the result parsing work in that case?
The result parsing just works same as what CBT does. So it's literally using CBT, but it is orchestrating CBT Teuthology. But yeah, I think to address the variability problem, I think it's very easy in Teuthology to give it a label of machines that it could just use for this purpose. Then we could address the variability problem if we just say that we have like 2 machines, 3 machines that will be dedicatedly just used for long-running performance testing using Teuthology. Then we can set them aside and label them with something, and Teuthology will just consume them.
Sure. If you were careful in the Sepia lab about which machines you grabbed and had them all in the same switch. So, in the Smithy machines, if you really were careful about making sure that those were all local, close by each other, and didn't get like changed dramatically or always were the same, that might give you relatively decent test consistency. Certainly, it's worth a try.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we had this problem earlier as well when I was exploring this much more, and I did see a lot of variability across machines. Even comparing results wasn't like sensible to do that. So I think we need to narrow down the machines first, and then also like we again have the same thing that Crimson does. We need a baseline to compare with. So we need to do like master versus PR or like master versus some commit that we want to test. There needs to be a comparison mechanism as well.
So in terms of this, though, that's kind of what we'll do with Jenkins, right? Is we'll do a PR comparison for like, PRs that are coming in for CI. This, though, right, is more like what's the long running kind of like, if we want to build up a bigger cluster and see how it's doing, once a week or something, right? That's kind of not the.
Yeah, ideally, if we have our database piece put together, I would really want to have like a record of how master has been doing like weekly, or like we could store these results based on SHA-1s and have historic information or like time series data of how things are improving or not improving.
I think what we'll get, right, is from Jenkins, we'll get really fine grained data. We'll get like every day we'll potentially have multiple sample points coming in on a small scale with like one, like a single OSD, or maybe a couple OSDs, if we set tests so that you can get, a couple OSDs on it. This seems like it'd be more, we want to grab a bunch of nodes and create like a bigger cluster in Teuthology that then we can see, are there effects that we can't easily test on a per commit basis, right? Like bigger tests, longer running tests, bigger clusters, more weird, things or something, corner cases. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean,
that's how I was seeing it too. I think those are two complementary pieces. We need to have full coverage of both aspects.
Yep. Nihad, do you see Teuthology being useful for the actual like testing of specific PRs? I was not looking at it that way. I was more looking at that as the Teuthology as the kind of potentially longer running piece. Is that how you're seeing it too, or am I wrong with that?
I think as Josh mentioned, there are two separate pieces. The Jenkins integration that we have already is working fine for Crimson. I don't see why it won't work fine for Classic OSD. So we should just keep using that and probably expand that to like support more kind of workloads, because I know that currently we only have Rados Bench, but we could include FIO and even RGW workloads for PR. It's an entry criteria for PRs, I would say. What Teuthology could help us achieve is the longer running tests, and those over time, I would like to see how we are doing, right? I mean, currently with point releases and stuff, there's no way to figure out how much we improved or how much we did not improve. So we should technically have like a graph showing us that in a month's time, what changed based on commit. And Teuthology, if we have dedicated machines, Teuthology could be one place that could be used to store that information as well, because we can technically archive information that Teuthology collects. So you don't really lose the performance data that you're collecting. So you could currently tune Teuthology to say that, okay, I want to preserve 6 months worth of performance data, and then we could use that to see time series information about how we're doing over time. So I guess those are two different aspects. One thing where Teuthology can be useful. One thing I think the PR testing Jenkins is fine, and I think it's a better approach.
Okay. Nihad, do you want to take point on the two? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say one major benefit of the Jenkins aspect is that it doesn't require packages, so it's not an extra hour or two of wait to generate packages to run the performance tests, which you do need for Teuthology. So that's one reason why it makes more sense for these short run PI drives.
Sure. Okay. Neha, would you like to take point on the teuthology part of this, since you wrote that piece?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I see. The only missing pieces today, I think, is about identifying or labeling some machines that we want to run those tests on, making sure. I think currently the integration that we have only runs on single nodes, so we'll have to probably expand that. I'm sure we can do that. We just haven't done that, or we'd never needed to do that. So we'll have to make sure it runs on multi-node. And there is also the aspect of workloads. CostBench is something that has not been maintained, so I don't see that could fully work unless somebody spends time on that. And to be honest, I don't have the bandwidth to just maintain it right now. So for FIO and Rados Bench, sure. I mean, I don't think that should be a hard job, and I can take that if you want me to.
And for RGW, I'd say just use HS Bench. CostBench is such a
somebody would need to go and write that integration with teuthology, but yeah, that shouldn't be a hard job as well.
Yeah, it's we've got the wrapper and CBT for it. It's just a command line tool, right? So it's you give it flags and it works like FIO, so it should be pretty easy to run.
Yeah, that'd be great because to be honest, CostBench has been real pain. There are multiple reasons which we have failed to understand about it, and maintaining it has been a real challenge.
Yeah, that's why I wrote HS Bench. So it's I think it will work much better. And then if there are bugs in it, you can blame me. So there's that too.
There you go. That's what I was waiting for.
All right, we're out of time. We went over. So anything else for Pacific that we should talk about, or this is a lot, right? So I think we've got plenty to do.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. The same for you. Bye.